Great. So I'm happy to see so many young people here. Nobody here seems to be below the age of 18. For a session on dating and love and Tinder and marriage. And just to be very transparent with you, I'm going to be looking at my phone constantly because I have my Tinder open. So we're going to start the session by talking about sex and marriage. And my first question is to Brigid, who told me a wonderful story about how she met her husband over 44 years ago. And when she first met him, I think you just met and decided to get married immediately. Isn't that right, Brigid? Yes. So can you tell us a little bit about the time between when you met him at the silver shop and when you got married and your living situation?
Yes, so I met him when I was the great age of 31, which in England in the 60s was so old, nobody expected you to get married. You were on the shelf forever. And when my husband went to ask my father for my hand in marriage two years later, my father was saying, "Are you sure? It's a lot to take on. I don't think, she's 32. So Dad was putting him off. Anyway, we were godfather and godmother at a christening, and we decided to buy a present jointly because we could buy something more expensive. So we went to the Silver Vaults in London, and we chose our gift. And then my husband took out his checkbook to pay his share of it, and the man who was selling the thing thought that we were married, and he said, "Will Mrs. Wadhams," my husband's called Wadhams, "will Mrs. Wadhams be giving a separate check, or are you going to pay for both of you?" And we were so embarrassed, because it was our first date, that the man thought that I was Mrs. Wadhams, so we both went bright red, but in our hearts we both knew that I would be Mrs. Wadhams one day, which happened about 2 years later. And he was posted abroad to Nepal, and we courted each other by letter, which I think was part of the reason that we fell so much in love, that we sort of exposed ourselves to each other by letter, post.
But tell us about when he was staying with you in London.
Oh, yes. So he was posted to Nepal, and then he came back to England, and by this time we were lovers. We were living together in Nepal, and when he came to London, he came to stay in my flat. By this time, I am 32 years old, and I'm independent, pay my own way in life. But when my parents came to visit me, we had to push the 2 single beds apart, pack up all of Alan's things and put them in suitcases in a cupboard, take away his shaving kit, and pretend that I lived on my own, because I couldn't let my parents know that I was living in sin, as it was known then.
Living in sin. I've definitely done the, "Mom, I'm going for a trip to Goa with friends." Friends, right? When I'm going to Goa with my boyfriend. Ryan, you lived with your wife, I don't know if Irina's with us in the audience, before you got married, and you are a practicing devout Catholic. How did that go down?
Well, so I was raised Catholic, but we decided to live with each other because when you're in your 30s, your hormones dictate more than reason and anything else does. So we lived, my family was actually very supportive. So while they were Catholic, they were also very liberal Catholic, and they were fairly supportive. But on the flip side, when I look at this in hindsight of course being 2020, and when I sit here on this panel and we're discussing things like sexual liberation and Tinder and Facebook and so on and so forth, what strikes me is that India is going through a period of change. And in some regards, these new cultural forces have come in via social media and so on and so forth. And I'm not convinced that all of them might necessarily lead to fulfillment and peace. So even though I lived with my wife and we are very happily married, I'm still not entirely convinced that it might work for everyone. Especially given the context a lot of our communities, histories, mythologies, and cultures come from.
You're bringing up contentment and peace, and here we are to talk about sex. Okay, so let's talk about dating apps and technology and what that does for romance and love. I remember when I tried Tinder for 3 days, and I met this man, and he said, "Are you on Snapchat?" And I immediately deleted him, and I deleted the app because I thought that was a code word for BDSM. I didn't even I didn't realize that it was this separate app, and then I asked my friend's little brother, what is this Snapchat business? And he said, well, it's just like WhatsApp, but the pictures disappear and everything disappears, so there's no track left of it. And I thought that was a really interesting concept, because you're supposed to date and have sex in pursuit of marriage, which is supposed to be a forever thing. And yet here is this man on Tinder asking me to download Snapchat, presumably because he wants to send me messages that will have no trace. So Surya, in your life as a university student growing up in Bangalore, why do people date? Do you think it's for sex? Do you think it's for companionship? Is it to get married?
I think it really depends, but of course, since you were talking about Snapchat and Tinder and things like that, I mean, the term dating app, I mean, I think dating apps have got nothing to do with dating anymore. I mean, it's purely to hook up. Okay, let's be clear about that. Whether it's Tinder or whether it's Grindr, Winder, any of the doors, it's purely to do with hooking up. And let's not kid ourselves. If you're on Tinder, you probably join it because you think you're going to find the love of your life, but then you're just happy if you're not sleeping alone that night, right? And so that's where dating apps are today. And taking it a step forward, I mean, I'm not on Shadi.com and things like that, so I don't know how those work. But
21.
Yeah. And thankfully, I'm not on Shadi.com and things like that, and I really hope nobody in this room is. But what I'm trying to get at is that I really don't know where these things are heading in a while, and so apps like Tinder, for instance, they are currently at least they are for hooking up, and I don't think anybody is there to find love, at least.
So let's talk about sex and let's talk about love.
I actually want to add a little bit to this previous conversation, which is about Snapchat, that, it's deleted and it disappears from the record. And a point to ponder is that nowadays, so many of us are glued to our social media, all of us are on Facebook, many of us tweet, so on and so forth. And the point is this: we place our lives into the hands of a gigantic advertising agency, which is called Facebook. So all this data you keep putting into your phone, into your computer, is being sold and peddled and used to sell you things you might not necessarily need, including philosophy.
Could I say something? Because I have four grandchildren. Sorry, missed one out. And the oldest is 11, 10, 9. They're that kind of age. And all of them, the 11-year-old said to me the other day that he didn't have very many followers on something, which I've never heard of. But he's obviously very concerned about this at the age of 11. And the 10-year-old is worried about pictures going onto mobile phones. And I just think, isn't this destructive of childhood? I mean, that these children should become so obsessed about these things so young.
I think it's also destructive of quality, which is nowadays very often, your feeds are determined not by their quality, but by how many likes they get. It's a lot of what we are reading today on our social media doesn't necessarily depend on how meaningful or truthful it is. As you can see from the recent election in the United States, where fake news has literally changed the course of world history. So it is. I think your nephew. Did you say
grandchildren?
Your grandchildren. You have an excellent point regarding your grandchildren.
I thought it was pathetic to worry about how many followers you have when you're 11.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what Ryan said is very true. I think algorithms and things like that kind of put us in these echo chambers on social media. So what you like is what you get. You keep getting more of, and it would be interesting to think about how that affects dating, because if you go out in the real world, you're going to obviously want to discover new people and, people who are obviously different from you.
It affects dating. One day Donald Trump's going to land up at your door.
Yeah, but I'm sure, I'm not too sure of how the technology behind Tinder works apart from, the location and things like that. But if Tinder is going to throw up results to you of people very similar to who you've already swiped right, then I don't think that's very that's good news for discoverability in terms of who you want to find and things like that.
But taking the conversation back to sex, I don't know why we took it away from that to begin with. Does sex mean the same thing to men and women? And this is a very, very gendered and tricky question to ask. And I'm asking it, Brigid, because I would love for you to share with the audience two of the stories you mentioned to me. One is on the lack of access to birth control and abortions back in the 50s. But then also the story from New York, which really, really stayed with me.
Yes, so I grew up in the 60s when there was no birth control, the pill hadn't been invented, and all of us lived at home. So if you thought you were going to have an affair with somebody and you wanted to get hold of birth control, you couldn't because the doctor and the chemist both knew your parents. So you were sort of stuck, there was nowhere to go. And every relationship that you had, say from the age of about 17 or 18, in the 50s was dogged by fear on the side of the women, counting as your period was late. I mean, we were absolutely rigid with fear because there was no way to stop ourselves getting pregnant. And then abortion was illegal. To have a baby unmarried was a scandalous thing, an illegitimate baby, it was called. I knew one girl who had an illegitimate baby. She was thrown out of her family, middle-class family. I knew girls who had backstreet abortions and were raped by the abortionists. I mean, it was a hideous scene in the 50s. And, but there was something about us. We didn't really protest. And I was saying earlier, I went on a blind date. I was a fashion journalist, and I went to New York for the opening of Vidal Sassoon's salon in 1964. And I was asked on a blind date by an older, richer man. And he took me to El Morocco, and I remember thinking, ooh, El Morocco, I'm in El Morocco. And then at the end of it, he had a chauffeur-driven car, and he said, I'll take you home in the car. But he didn't take me home, he took me to his flat. And then he said, come up and have a drink. And so I said, no, I think I'd rather go home. But we were so shy and so well brought up that none of us ever dared say no or say fuck off, or, we just didn't have the words to say no. So in the end, he went on and on about having a drink. So I went up to his flat. I didn't want to go. I absolutely hated him. And as soon as the door of his flat was open, he pounced on me and he ripped my dress, literally almost all the way down. And I picked up something heavy and hit him with it. It was a glass ashtray. And I then just escaped out of the room, holding my dress together. And then I had to walk across New York at 2 o'clock in the morning with my dress ripped off. I stopped to ask the chauffeur if he would take me home, and he said no, he wouldn't. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I think it was the most frightening experience of my life. And I blamed it on myself because I just was too polite and well brought up to say, no, I do not want to have a drink with you. I'm going home.
I don't think that that's as fantastical as it may sound, because I'm not sure. I, for one, have definitely been in situations where I've felt nervous about saying no, nervous about saying, well, yes, I had dinner with you, yes, I talked to you on the phone for 2 hours, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want to do what you want to do right now. And I'd be very surprised if there's a single woman in the room who has not felt that discomfort. Which brings me to my next question, actually aimed at Surya and Ryan. Women, I think, we're still struggling, and perhaps especially so in India, to be okay with wanting sex, to be okay with being sexual, and being able to articulate that without covering it in a guise of I want to be your girlfriend, I want to have a relationship, and yet sometimes you do want those things as well. The thing is, I'm sure that's true for men as well, but I think the expectations of women and men are somewhat different for both the genders. So the question to you guys is, how did you feel when you were dating or when you are dating, when a woman is quite upfront and clear about what she wants and if that is not a relationship? And does that happen often?
Well, I don't think there's anything right or wrong per se about wanting sex or having sex. And I think it's wonderful if women know what they want and go out and get it. It's excellent. However, in a country like India, I come from a background which is from within a cantonment where everyone has had several generations of quote-unquote English, in inverted commas, education. We've been exposed to the philosophies we're talking about here on this stage. Whereas, and I think it's wonderful, but for a lot of women and men in India, I think it's far more difficult given the context, the cultures, and the environments they live within. So in my case, I think it's wonderful if people know what they want. And that changes with time also. What you want when you're 21 changes dramatically when you're 31. And when you're 51, it definitely changes. Though I'm not there yet. Very soon.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's just great if women or men know exactly what they want from a relationship, or know what they want from a partnership, or if they want sex, if they don't want sex, if they want sex, what kind of sex do they want, when do they want it, why do they want it, etc., etc. And not just know what they want and when they want it, but also articulate it, because it just makes things easier for everybody, I think, from instead of, keeping each other guessing and, having this, as you said, this kind of awkwardness or, feeling kind of nervous to say no and things like that. I mean, if everybody's just open about it, I mean, it just becomes a whole lot easier for everybody.
If I may, there's a point which struck me. And it's this. It's this whole philosophy of, if you will, self-indulgence, which you see surrounding us in advertising and in other ways these days. Like if you take a walk down the street in Bombay or anywhere else in India, if you look at every single billboard, it's find yourself, follow your dream, be yourself. That's the subtext to most advertising messages. And what this implies is that you will find peace and fulfillment if your desires are met, including sexual desires. But that's very far from the truth. And happiness and fulfillment are not, they're not promised. They come on their own more often than not as a byproduct of how you lead your life, rather than chasing after any individual pleasure or narcotic or whatever it is, So in some regards, once again, I'm not standing in judgment of sex or looking for it or having it, but there are much larger forces at work, I feel, in our lives, and we're deeply influenced by them. And being aware of these forces is important.
But don't you feel, Ryan, that there is a certain story that we are all told and we are all sold, that you're a child and then you grow up and you become a teenager and you have what you call the grand passion of your life. And if you're lucky, you marry your grand passion and you stay with that and you bring up children. And it's a very narrow way of defining how one can live their life. And I think in India particularly, it's quite hard for people to think about being a settled person. So I'm 37 and I'm single. And I'm in a career that I love. I'm an author and I love what I do. I've lived and worked in 14 countries. And my aunts will say, but when are you settling down? And I say, well, I've bought property in Bombay. Yes, but when are you settling down? So this question of you're not a complete person till you're married, it makes one think that perhaps marriage is not even about grand passion or love. It's sort of a tick box of living a successful life.
No, what you say resonates, for sure, because I have friends who say exactly the same thing. But for me, at least, like I'm 43 and I'm married. My wife is expecting a baby very soon. And for me, at least, and I can only speak for myself, I've never felt such peace and fulfillment and happiness. Which is to say, not to say that this has to apply to everyone, but when somebody says, how are you being settled? And I went through the same thing until I was 41 when I got married very recently. And with all my family, like, oh, I just went and shot a film for National Geographic. Oh, I did this, I did that. And it's, oh, when are you getting married? Like over and over again. And I mean, I've been through the running gun battle of various relationships and betrayals and heartbreak and then some more heartbreak. So I've been there, and I think for me at least, the happiness and fulfillment came from, not from the sex. It came from the idea of a commitment, which is you endure, you put somebody else, you put an idea before your own desires.
Absolutely.
And on its own, the peace comes, the happiness comes, the fulfillment comes. You don't have to chase it anymore.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I say something? You said if you're lucky, you marry your first grand passion. But I think if you're unlucky, you marry your first grand passion. And I would say if I'd married my first grand passion, I would probably have thrown myself into a river by now.
Likewise.
And I married a man who, as I mentioned, we wrote to each other. I married a man who'd become a great friend. And there's another person who's been married for a long time in the audience here today, an Englishman friend. And he told me that the success of his 49-year-long marriage was because he and his wife were best friends. And I think my husband is my best friend. So, and it had to do with sex at the beginning, but it's something that lasts much longer than sex. It's this friendship. I wish him well. I want him to be happy, and he wants me to be happy. And I think that's the recipe.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
One sec. I think, Antara, as far as, aunties and uncles who just keep asking you when you're going to settle down and things like that, and, I'm just dreading the phase that probably will start for me, in the next couple of years. I hope not, but I think they just want to attend a big fat wedding, and they just want the free food. They just want and it's better if it's a destination wedding, right? Imagine like a free junket in Goa. Antara is going to be paying for it, and I'm just going to go on a free trip, get free food, and get gifts and wear expensive clothes, click photos, change my WhatsApp DP, And I think when are you settling down has got a lot to do with that.
Oh, when I got married, I'm sorry.
No, I was only going to say that I think a lot of it's from parents. Children are exhausting. You want to bring an end to the childhood. And so that's why you want them to get married and go off as quickly as possible and stop being your responsibility.
It's when I got married, we got out of the church, and as we exited, my mother hugged my wife and said, "He's your headache now."
I think Irina would absolutely agree with that. So, when we talk about marriage, it sounds from the stories I hear from both of you that there are many wonderful things that come with marriage, and maybe at the center of it is somebody holding your hand for the rest of your life and always being there. And you said something lovely about how a successful marriage is when you're able to be nice to each other throughout your life, throughout all the hard times, throughout the times when he doesn't pick up his dirty socks and underwear and leaves them on the floor, or she does something incredibly irritating, and you have to try and be nice through all of that. Are the lines between romantic love and non-romantic love as severe as we make them? The lines between romantic love and non-romantic love?
No, because I think my love for my husband was very romantic. I mean, the early days were very romantic. And I think I was very lucky because he was a diplomat who lived abroad a lot of the time. And when we had children, I had to come back to England a lot. So we were often separated. And so I think that's part of the reason that our marriage has endured for 44 years, because we've very often not been together. And I think if I had been shut up in a small flat in a suburb of London, without many trips or without any trips and without any absences from my husband, I would probably be divorced by now.
Well, right now, my wife, she's come all the way down from Bangalore. I find Strobe Talbot more interesting. I'm going for his talk. So she's in the other hall down the road here. So I completely agree with it. And I think a lot of the fulfillment that comes from a relationship is giving each other your space and not having to do every single thing together and so on and so forth.
But having said that, my husband was posted to Kazakhstan, and I know Ryan's wife is from Kazakhstan. And Kazakhstan is full of utterly ravishing, beautiful women. And I took a look. My husband had 45 girls in his office and 5 men, and each of the girls could have won a beauty contest. So I looked at this situation and I decided that unlike most of the other wives, I would stay in Kazakhstan with him. And I did. And I watched all the other husbands going off with Kazakh girls. So I think you have to choose your time of absence very carefully.
When we visit Kazakhstan, that's the only place my wife doesn't leave my side. She's very considerate and kind there.
I'm still laughing about that. Choose your absence carefully. But it also sounds like, from speaking to both of you, that there seems to be a healthy expectation of what you want your husband to be to you and what you want Irina to be to you, which is not everything in the world. It looks like you expect there to be other close relationships, other inspirations. And yet somehow, going back to your earlier point, Ryan, I feel like we're sold this idea of marriage where, it's like Dilwale in the mustard fields of Punjab. You are everything to me. And in a Hindu wedding, you actually say that. You're my Swami, you're my everything. Not sure what the man says to the woman. We'll come back to that point. But is that not only unrealistic, but perhaps is that something that puts too much pressure on a marriage when you're forced to be the muse, the inspiration, the comedian, the helper, the lover, the friend, everything, all the time, without anybody else ever stepping in to play one of those roles?
I'm very jealous, so I wouldn't want anybody stepping into any of those roles. And I do believe that lust is the strongest emotion. So I never trust anybody very far, because I think men especially, can be carried, because they don't think about the children and the families quite so much. So I never really completely and utterly trust my husband, which is why I was always in Kazakhstan.
What about in college, Surya? What do you think people who are in serious relationships in college, do you think that, do you see differences between the couples who do everything together all the time and those who sort of have other aspects to their lives?
The thing is, I think the couples who are doing everything together all the time are definitely going to break up soon. It's just, they're too clingy, there's no space in the relationship, they're just going to get, suffocated with having too much of each other around, and it's just a matter of time before, the relationship breaks up and they break down and a lot of other things break, heartbreak and etc. I think the couples that do stay on for longer are the ones that give each other a lot of space and, kind of understand each other's individual wants and needs and things like that. And I think it all boils down to, adjustment and compromise at the end of the day, right? I mean, and what's the thin line that kind of differentiates the two? Because adjustment is probably, you have a partner and you love him or her so much that you're okay with, kind of making a change to your life or to your behaviors or to your schedule, etc. And, kind of doing it for your partner because you love him or her and you want the relationship to grow. But then I think when it becomes a compromise is when you're not doing it for the relationship to grow, but when you do it to save the relationship. I think that's when the switch happens. If you're doing it to save the relationship, it becomes a compromise, and compromise and its negative connotation is something that you're doing unwillingly. You're compromising even though you don't want to do it, and that's when problems in a relationship start, when there's a compromise. But I also think that's changing a lot, because for a long time the compromise was at least in India, whether it's a relationship or whether it's the marriage, the compromise was always the onus of the woman or the girl, and I think the women have had enough, and they're no more compromising. They're adjusting. Guys are adjusting, girls are adjusting, but girls and the women have had enough of compromising, and I think that's a positive development.
There's a great ad. I don't remember if it's an Amazon ad or some other. I swear Amazon didn't pay me to say that. I actually don't think it was an Amazon ad. Where the woman says, "Main adjust kar lungi." And, you know, that word adjust is such a gendered word, specifically in India, right? I definitely know of extended family and their parents being telling them, so what if he hit you that one time, you know, adjust kar lo. There's this question of you have to adjust, and it sort of ties into what you're saying about women tend to think about family and kids more before taking steps that would be ruinous for a marriage than a man. How much of that is because of a true desire, or it's because that's what we've been socialized to do? So we very much see ourselves as a mother, we see ourselves as a wife, and so the idea of that ending is so horrific that you're willing to put up with behavior that you don't want to put up with. Whereas perhaps for men who are more likely to work out of the house, more likely to be associated with their career, there are other parts to your identity where having a marriage that didn't work out is more okay because I'm still a very successful, you know, head of a business group in my company. Do you think that sort of plays out?
Well, I remember when I was in college, we were having this tremendous discussion in a molecular genetics class about exactly what you were just saying, which is women have to put up with so much more. And the professor ended the discussion by saying, sperm is cheap and eggs are expensive, which is to say that until, of course, birth control changed things a lot, but before that, if your egg was fertilized, you were stuck for 9 months, you had society on your back, you had your parents probably giving you hell, so on and so forth. And your whole body changed, you had to go through tremendous trial and a huge investment. Whereas a guy, I mean, 2 hours later, depending on the guy, could go out and do it again. So it's true, I think, that it's easier for men to be unfaithful and serve a larger biological purpose of fertilizing as many eggs as they can.
Well, one of the things that horrifies me about Donald Trump is that he thinks that women who have abortions should be put in prison. And I think for every woman who has an abortion, there's a man who's caused her to be pregnant. And what about them?
Absolutely. No, for sure.
But about making sacrifices and compromises, I had to give up my job. I never let my husband forget this for a minute. I gave up my job to follow him round the world for 35 years. And then now he's retired, and I've become an author, because in Kazakhstan I couldn't think of anything to do except write a book, and it became a bestseller. So now I'm an author.
It's a wonderful book that you must read. I just finished it yesterday. It's called Diplomatic Baggage. You cannot stop laughing. It's a wonderful read, so you must read it.
So now I have to do lots of talks, and he drives me to the talks, and he's groaning and moaning about it. And I say, yes, but I followed you for 35 years. So you do get comeback time.
So I thought I'll ask one last question, then open it up to the audience, because I think we'll have many more interesting questions coming from there. Is it a lie or is it true that men don't want to commit and women are always looking for that commitment? That's always the trope that we see. Is that what you see in having lived in so many places around the world? Is that what you see in college? Is that what you've seen in war when you've been doing photography?
I think it's a bit of a myth, actually, which is that I guess people go through phases, and I think eventually, like, I've been around, so to speak, and after a while you want something more, because you have all this sex, you meet all these people, and then there's a bit of a vacuum, and things progress, and things change, and you change. Like I said earlier on, what you wanted when you were 21 changes dramatically when you're older. And so things change, and I think those definitions have changed in India also, because especially in cities, there's been so much dramatic change ever since our economy opened up, and it's yet to be seen whether it's going to lead to more happiness and fulfillment. I'm not too sure, really.
I just want to interject to say that Ryan's book is actually about a senior citizen, a Tamil Brahmin man who's very conservative, and decides to go off to war. It's called Mr. Iyer Goes to War. It's available at the bookshop. You must buy it. But one of the things I love about this book is that he's actually in a home for the dying in Varanasi, and he falls in love with a woman who's also at a home for the dying down the street. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that comes out.
So it's inspired by Don Quixote, the Cervantes' Don Quixote, the idealist who lives by the values of an older age. And he tries to live his values in a world that's changing very fast. So he escapes from a home for the dying and charges all those windmills.
Going back to the question, I think I agree that it's a myth too. I mean, I don't think either men or women are more afraid of committing or not committing or whatever, but I think it just depends on the circumstances, just depends on the person, and because I have like loads of guy friends who, you know, are seemingly, apparently deeply in love with somebody in the class or whatever, and they've been rejected, and you know they've been you know kind of said no to, and they've obviously been depressed and whatever. But apart from that, also there are couples who've, you know, not dated, but they've casually dated or whatever that means, but you know gone out and, you know, hung out and stuff. But when it comes to proposing to each other or committing or whatever, I mean, there are lots of cases in which it's the girl who doesn't want to commit. So I'm not too sure whether there's a gender difference there. I think it's just personal choice. In fact, there's a cousin of mine who's in Bombay. In fact, who's a girl, young working girl. She works in PR, and you know, she was really in love with a very famous young cricketer who
is it?
Plays without taking names. I mean, anybody can guess.
Batsman.
It's anybody's guess.
Spinner.
Batsman, but anyway. No, they were really in love, and I think they did decide on, you know, getting married at some point and things. But when he actually popped the question, she was like, I don't think I'm ready, and then the relationship ended there. So I think commitment depends a lot on maybe even your mind space at the particular moment also, you know. I mean, if he had asked like 10 minutes later, she would have said yes, but I don't know.
It's not a good marriage.
I think that there's no difference really in getting married, because getting the physical act of getting married doesn't change things very much. But the big commitment time is the children, because then you are making a commitment and you have to think about it.
Absolutely. With that, I thought we could open it up to the audience. Can we give one of the mics to the audience? Oh, we have one. Excellent. Yes, what questions do you have for us? There we go.
Hi, this one's for Surya.
Yeah, hi.
I know you said that people in your class, especially the boys,
Yeah.
are very heartbroken over these girls and they go into depression. But actually,
Right.
my question is for the men. I feel that a lot of the young ladies these days are very accomplished. You know, they have multiple interests. They are very sort of into different things. They like music, they like art, they like dance. They're like a complete package. And that's what the sort of media these days is encouraged to sort of tell girls, that you can have it all. You can work, you can have a great home life, and you can, you know, sort of fulfill all these like aspects of yourself.
Yeah.
And men, I just feel that are just sort of stuck in this mediocre like sort of state. And so naturally no other girl in that class is going to take notice of this guy because he's just like all the other guys, you know. So what can men do to sort of like break out of that?
I'm not too sure that's true, because these guys are also quite accomplished and doing a lot of things, and you know, out there, and in terms of, you know, being multi-talented and being, you know, really ambitious and involved and things like that. But I quite don't know how to answer that question, because I know many girls also who've, you know, been like depressed after being rejected by a guy. So it's as I was saying, it's not so much a guy and girl thing. It's just that there are examples on both sides of the spectrum. So that's all I was trying to
But
get
perhaps
at.
expectations have changed, and I think the notion of being a successful woman, God, I hope it's different than it used to be before, and I hope it's not just about fair and lovely anymore. But I do think that perhaps the speed with which being a successful, attractive, desirable woman in India, I'm hoping that it's been more than it perhaps has been for men. Other questions, thoughts, comments?
Can I just say something? I got married at 33, and I think that was partly because I didn't want to make a commitment. I had a wonderful career, and I think it's what Ryan said earlier. I think this commitment thing is to do with the age you are and what you happen to want at that age. And by 33, I was ready to settle down and be happily married. But earlier, I probably didn't want to.
Yeah. I think it also depends on having been there and done that also. When you've been through a few things, you suddenly realize not what you want, but what you don't want. And then what might have appeared more boring when you were younger suddenly appears more attractive.
Sir, you had a question.
Yeah. Ryan, you said you may want something at 21, something else at 31, something else at 41. But for a man, something doesn't really change. I want an honest answer to that. Whether it's 21, 31, 41, 61.
No, I think lust is you're absolutely right. So, like I said, sperm is cheap and eggs are expensive. You're absolutely right.
Basics don't change.
No, but it's also, I think, when you are in a committed relationship, you have to control your desires rather than give in to them, because you want your relationship and your family more than you want to maybe get laid for.
But that's very interesting, Ryan, because you said when you're in a committed relationship, you have to control your desire. Are you then saying that the desire is not within the relationship?
No, I'm saying you have to control your desire to screw around outside the relationship.
Yes, yes.
It's just opportunity quite often.
Say again?
It's just opportunity quite often.
Yes, in my field, I'm a photographer. I travel the world. So there's a lot of opportunity. But I think your wife will always find out. And a bit of fear always helps. Yeah, your wife's sitting right behind you, isn't it? Yeah? Is that a gun in your handbag? You're holding the reins, yes.
Other questions and thoughts? Yes, there's a woman over there.
Okay, hi. So I've been in a marriage for 4 years now. Yes. And I always thought that I was in an equal marriage where we shared all our work and we did equal work and you are not doing this and I'm not doing. So 7 months ago I had a baby and all of a sudden everything, thanks. And all of a sudden everything's changed. I keep bickering that you're not helping me enough. I have to do all the housework. So sometimes I believe, is it because I'm depressed that not having the same life that I used to have before, or what is it? I don't know.
Well, you mean the bickering started after the baby came?
Yes, yes.
Well, for me, it didn't. It started much before.
Oh.
But
yeah, maybe when I was pregnant.
And I think when I mean, I'm so happy my wife isn't here. See the fear. I was talking about fear. I'm feeling it now. But when she got pregnant, it would be like 10:30 at night. I feel like grapes. So I'd be like, what? No, I want grapes. So I'd go travel the city and find some place and buy grapes and come back. And then when I show her the grapes, she says, no, I don't feel like them now. So I'm like, oh God, I spent 300 rupees for half a kilo. What do I do?
Yes,
so then I'll eat all the grapes. I'll eat all the grapes. I'll force myself, but I don't want to waste them. And I'm quite cheap. And then at the end of that, she'll suddenly, when I'm on the last two, she'll say, I feel like grapes. So I'll be like, oh God. So I have to get back in the car.
So I believed I didn't do any of this and I didn't trouble him at all during my pregnancy. So maybe I keep thinking that, he's torturing me.
So is that adjustment or
compromise?
No, I love my wife. So I'll go and get her grapes whenever she wants.
Ryan, I got to say this. When Irina pushes out something the size of a watermelon out of a hole the size of a peanut, you're going to wish you bought her a hell of a lot more grapes.
Oh my goodness. The end of April. Yes. Any more questions? Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Everyone has questions. Nobody wants to ask them.
No, so
All your wives
actually,
are present and
a
husbands.
question for Surya.
Yeah.
Because actually, it's been quite a long time since I've been in college, and, been in love and, broken up and all that. So I want to know, has anything changed? I don't know how you will answer that question, but, it's just sounds still the same. I always thought when I'm seeing, when we hear about Snapchat or we see Tinder and we say, man, things have gone down the drain, the kids have become so promiscuous. But like, are kids having sex in college? Or like, what are they? Because I think in our time also we should do that, but it would not be, we should not talk about it.
Yeah.
It used to happen in the chapel. But now does it happen more open or people are... So
No, I mean, if your question is what's changed, I mean, I wouldn't know. I mean, maybe you could start and then I'd like take over.
Oh my goodness, the pressure is on.
No, it still sounds the same.
Okay.
It sounds like exactly like what is to happen, like,
Okay, then
20,
that's
25.
disappointing actually. I mean, I'm disappointed.
I'm disappointed.
I'm a little old-fashioned in that sense, but it's interesting that nowadays we spend our days in offices, and we in these big boxes, then we get to another box which takes us home, and then we get to, and so we're living in all these different compartments, and because of highly industrialized modern life in the cities, all these apps are useful because they allow people to meet each other, have sex, start relationships, so on and so forth. So we live within this environment, and at the same time we're fed all these messages. We use these little devices called cell phones, which and they advertise to us constantly and they sell our data. So I'm not too sure, I'm actually seriously not too sure where humanity in many regards is headed with this.
So I'm just, maybe to reframe, are
Yeah.
people still looking for love? Because when I look around, I say, I don't see people value love anymore. But from what I hear from you, I think there are people who are still out there looking for love.
No, I think there are people out there looking for sex, and if love happens, they're just happy. But no, yeah, primarily, as I said, dating apps, it's not about dating anymore. It's about sex, yes.
So what is dating then?
Dating is when, okay, now the lines are like very blur. Sorry? Netflix and chill. Netflix and chill is, I mean, it's nowhere close to dating. I mean, yeah, it's also about sex. I mean, but then as...
Wait, back up, say that again. Netflix and chill is about sex?
Yeah. I mean, you haven't heard of the phrase before?
No.
Clearly, I'm getting this all wrong in addition to things.
Never heard of it ever.
No, but coming back to his question, actually, talking about if things have changed, I mean, at least of what I've heard and read and things like that, I think what's changed is really access and communication technology and things like that, which have made it a lot easier to talk about and learn about and, kind of be exposed to the West and, new apps and new technology and new trends and things like that. I think that's what's primarily changed,
But don't you also think agency has changed, you guys? I mean, I'm really hoping that this is true. I'm hoping that both women and men have a lot more ability to sort of be able to say, this is what I want before they even communicate it. I think before there were a lot more constraints around it. But I have to say, I mean, when I went to college 10, 15 years ago, people were definitely having sex.
I think they're constantly being told what you want. You're constantly being told by the media, by movies, by television, by advertising. You're constantly being told what you want. And I think it's up to all of us to figure out what we need to get ahead in life, to find our fulfillment.
One thing to the young woman here who is the mother of the 7-month-old, a lot of my guy friends who are really, really thrilled to be fathers and are also completely terrified. And I think I've seen them go through this phase where they really, really want to do the right thing and be there fully and be a parent fully and not leave it all to the mom. And then they don't have the boobs. And so there's breastfeeding at night, and then, he's like, the first couple of nights he'll be like, I'm going to get up in solidarity, and then he's sleepless for the next 2 days in the office, and he's like, screw that, I can't feed her, so I'm not going to get up. But I'm seeing this sort of negotiating of relationships and what happens, and I've definitely seen women friends sort of say, he just doesn't get it, he holds him wrong, he does this wrong. So there is sort of this, I don't know why women think we just automatically know how to hold a newborn. I mean, they're freaking fragile. They're scary to hold. But somehow it's maybe, I don't know, men, we see more images of women holding babies, so we think we can, and men don't. But I do see a lot of that negotiating around being a parent. I don't know if...
Yes, when I had my first baby, she was sick. She got whooping cough. But she didn't cough, so nobody was diagnosing what was wrong with her. And my husband, the new father, kept saying to me, can't you do something? Can't you do something? As though, and I said, she didn't come with a set of instructions. I have no idea what to do. But somehow he thought because I was a woman, I would have some innate knowledge of what to do, but I didn't.
I'd love to hear from some fathers. I mean, is it extremely frustrating to go through that?
No, so actually, when you asked your question, so I went through the same thing. So it took 9 months for you to, and when you were pregnant with the child, you also knew there's a baby coming. So you're like, as a father, I also know there's a baby coming. But when the baby comes, then you say, oh man, this is for real. Like, you've been preparing for 9 months, and suddenly you see the baby and you say, man, this is for real. And this means that, my entire status has changed because I am like a cool dude, okay? I'm still a college kid who got married recently, okay, in my head. And then suddenly, there's this new responsibility. It takes time for us to get in. So I have a friend, okay, who is still, bunking his duties as a father and going and playing the guitar in cafes and all that. But slowly you see that, now the son is 3 years old, he takes the kid along. So I think, we still want to be kids, and we figure out that, when the kid is old enough, they can be kids together. So I guess just give him some time. Yeah.
Does anyone want to share their Tinder stories? No? Maybe not. Okay.
I think there's a question at the back.
Yeah, my question is like, in any relationship, like, I've been here for some time now. The positiveness part of it, like, you were saying, like, things are changing, like, times are growing, relationships are growing nowadays, like, times.
I'm sorry?
See, relationships are growing, like, over last 10, 15 years, if you see, the context, the aspects of relationship have changed, like, undergone change. Like, one thing which I am not seeing, like, changing is the positiveness part of it. The moment you are entering into a relationship, after some time, like, it enters into a domination part of it. The spacing out, you touched upon that, like, the spacing out starts dying there. And the domination part starts. Either one part is dominating or showing that positiveness part. How do you handle that?
Oh my goodness. Dangerous territory. I think it's a constant negotiation, and I've only been married I've lived with my wife for 4 years before we got married. So I think it's a constant negotiation, and there will be ups and downs like anything else. And when it comes to, I don't think there's dominating, but I think when somebody needs you to be there, you should be there. And it changes, and it goes in circles.
Thank you.
Brigid, do you want to answer that as well?
No, because I didn't hear.
I think if the domination is comfortable, then you go with it. If it's not, then you get a divorce and move on.
Okay, my question is to Ryan. When you started the conversation, you mentioned that you have entered into marriage, but there was this thought at the back of your mind that it might not be permanent, is the impression that I got, that this relationship or equation could also change. So my question is today that do people go into marriage thinking that yes, marriage has an expiry date, and isn't that a negative attitude to enter?
I completely agree with you. It's a negative attitude, and I did not have that preconception. I think it boils down to making a decision. And it's got nothing to really do with only romantic love.
But isn't that changing? What we see is that people are entering into marriage and they don't have that same level of commitment that used to be there earlier. They think that, yes, if it doesn't work out, I mean, we do have escape routes. And I think that's a little bit of a negative attitude to approach
I agree
marriage
with you. I think if somebody went into marriage with that attitude, it would be disastrous to think that, oh my goodness, this has an expiry date. Why would you want to get married then? I mean, I think you get married for a larger idea, and that includes family, that includes the idea of commitment, that includes putting something else before you and your own desires.
Thank you.
The key, says she.
I think there's one more question and then we'll end it. Yes, sir. You in the front.
Okay, so my question is for all those couples who are married over here. I'm not married, so I could be wrong at this point. As we see in many of the movies, like the foreign couples outside the India, like if they're not comfortable in a relationship, after like 1 or 2 years, they just break up. But in India, we see that there are a lot of couples who like hang on with each other if they're not even though comfortable. So my question is this, that what about the foreign couples? Like they lag behind in some romance, or they are like, they want to be more liberal, and towards the Indian couples, they want to stick to each other just because they don't want to face the society, the question that like there's some lag in between them. So it's that because of the scare of society that they be together, or is that their love, or they hang out with them?
Well, would anyone like
Brigid,
to answer
the
that?
question.
No, I think that's actually a very good question, which is, according to him, when he sees movies and he's exposed to what he thinks are relationships in other countries, that breaking off the relationship is far easier in, say, America or Europe than in India. And there's a lot of truth in what you say, I feel, because in India, a lot of women especially are constrained by their lack of financial security, possibly their culture, the attitude of their own families, and it's far more difficult for them to get out of a possibly abusive relationship. Yeah, for sure. It's true. Times are changing in cities. In cities.
Sorry,
in
what
cities,
is the same
I think.
now? But what is the same now? Okay.
I would agree with you in terms of the cities, but not in rural
And
areas.
even in cities, I mean, yeah.
But one more interesting point which he actually brought up, which is the whole sexual liberation movement in the US and all. If you look back at some of its influences, it's Margaret Mead's paper, Love in Samoa, where she did this research and it influenced the 60s movements and so on and so forth so heavily. I mean, since refuted, but the premise was that a lack of commitment, promiscuity, so on and so forth in a certain society in the South Pacific led to greater peace and fulfillment. But there were a lot of people refuted her research. So what you say is actually the feeling a lot of conservative people in India might have, that institutions that have stood the test of a lot of time are under threat by the new philosophies coming in.
I feel it could be because...
Surya.
Sorry.
Hello. Yeah. No, I was saying that I think even that's changing. I mean, what you say is absolutely true. I mean, it's been that way, but it's changing, and if you look at the current crop of Bollywood movies, I think that's also getting reflected a little bit. I mean, you know, the younger directors, the younger movies, the Befikre generation.
I think we have to
can I
end the
ask one last question?
conversation now.
Hello? Can I ask one last question, please?
Sure, but then we'll
Yeah, could you please comment on the mind game and politics people play in a relationship?
That's a great question, but we have to end
the mind
because
game,
there's going to be
And the politics people play in relationship.
Okay, Ryan really wants to answer that question.
So there are different kinds of colonialism, if you will, and cultural colonialism is definitely what's happening in India today with regards to, let's just say, postmodern ideology regarding.
Sorry, before everybody goes,
Absolutely.
Can we have a big round of applause for the panelists?
With you.